Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. As always, I am your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist and Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am joined by my co-host,
author Brian McKinley, godfather of vampire thrillers.
And Baron Voltage, a small, medium at large, and a pretty decent hypnotist when he's not getting struck by lightning.
So tonight we're going to be talking about psychic abilities, famous psychics like Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce. Although I would not personally consider it true in either of those cases, it is fair to say that where we've talked in the past a lot about fake psychics, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the real thing now.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that and we'll get into that Cayce has a very overrated track record.
What about Warren?
Lorraine?
Yeah.
I would consider her one of the legits.
There we go. We'll be talking about her.
But at any rate, before we do that, we do want to, of course, give our first sponsor, which would be Audible. So if you guys go to audibletrial.com/paranormale, that's audibletrial.com/paranormale, you can get a free 1-month membership to Audible. There are thousands of audiobooks out there that you could download, new stuff, old stuff. You get you get a free audiobook and a month's membership. If you decide to cancel the membership at any time, that audiobook is yours to keep. Now, the thing that we could personally recommend, because we were just to see him this week, is that a good friend of the show and one of our favorite guests, Dacre Stoker, the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, just published Dracula. That's the sign you can see at the bottom of your screen.
Yes.
It was beyond awesome.
It is
Very
a
nice
prequel to Dracula based on Bram Stoker's original notes.
And his life.
Yeah.
And his wife, and all these other details, some of the foreign editions that printed more material than the English editions did. It's very cool. Dacre and J.D. Barker are currently doing a tour to promote the book. If I would check that out on Facebook. If they're going to be in a city near you, I would go check them out. They're both very nice guys.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting and informative thing.
Their stuff is available.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And all their stuff is going to be available on Audible. So you can go check out brand new book, the prequel to Dracula, about Bram Stoker and his family.
Yes, it was without a doubt one of the most enjoyable experiences I could say, especially where it was being held.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was at this place out in Philly that was called the Rosenbach Museum. This place has so much history under its roof, it's ridiculous. They got a ton of events that are coming up this fall. I highly recommend it, especially if you're like a history junkie like I am, especially when it comes to literary.
Or a book lover, especially.
Yes, that old book smell. I mean, they showed us like the first paperback edition of Dracula, and I was like, my goodness. And the print was so small. My God. You could tell
nobody could read it.
Oh, it was insane. They got so much there. I highly recommend showing up without
And
a doubt.
they're doing a series on vampire folklore.
Yes.
Starting in November.
Oh, and it's going to be future guest is going to be the one that's teaching it, is he not?
Yes.
Hopefully, we can get him to come on.
We also have a whole bunch of guests that we've gathered thanks to being there. We do strongly recommend going and checking out JD and Dacre, or at least picking out the book if you don't have the chance to go see them. If you're in the Philadelphia area, I strongly encourage you to go check out the Rosenbach. It is a cool museum. Yeah. I mean, first edition paperback of Dracula with the original artwork on it, which was so cool.
It was. With the Hobbit's feet.
They had the first edition of the hardcover too.
Yeah,
which was
also the
with
notes.
one of the surviving dust jackets.
Yeah. The notes, which
Stoker's
are unique.
handwritten notes.
Yeah, that's the unique thing. Nobody else has that.
And on the first edition note, they also have the very first vampire novel in the English language, The Vampire. They have a first edition of that too.
Yeah, John Polidori.
And they have a bunch of other really cool things. It's a great museum. It's $10 for a tour. I remember looking that up at one point. So it's cheap.
Yeah.
It's in the middle of center city, so public transportation's available. There's parking in the area. It's definitely worth the trip.
Yeah, if you let me know if you guys are going to be going, maybe I'll be there and I'll meet you up.
Okay, I found the one we're talking about.
So yes, let's get this debate going because this should be interesting.
Finally, we got something that you and I can go head to head on.
So we're going to start by talking about the most famous prophet of the last. Let's say, face it, the most famous
last
prophet
500 years.
I'll go you one better. The most famous prophet who isn't in the Bible.
Okay, I'll work that. Cayce.
I'd say that Nostradamus is more famous than Cayce.
I would agree. He's just older.
Yeah, well, I figured we'd start with
Okay,
Nostradamus.
we'll start with Michel.
So Michel de Nostradam is actually an interesting figure in his own right. He was he was Jewish doctor. He was actually one of the few doctors at the time that would work with plague victims.
Yeah.
So I have to give him credit for that. And he had two particular means of predicting the future. One was, of course, astrology. The other one was
Divination.
Divination, specifically looking into a bowl of water.
Mm-hmm.
But he is famous for having predicted all manner of things, from the rise of the Nazi Party, the death of King, because this is the one we're talking about, King Henry II.
To the assassination of Kennedy.
French King Henry II.
Yeah, the French King Henry II. The assassination of Kennedy,
Some
Saddam
people
Hussein.
Yeah, some people even say 9/11.
That's that's the primary prophecy that they cite about 9/11 is a known hoax.
I believe it. Yeah, like I
Yeah.
said,
It's
it's,
like, no,
one
he
of
didn't
those
write
like
that.
consistent, misinformation bits that do get attributed to them. It's like those quotes you see on Facebook where they say this person said this and quoted this person. You know,
Now, I mostly know about Nostradamus from an HBO special with Orson Welles back when I was a kid. That was rather dramatic and cool, but
he will
most likely full of it.
he will discover when you are going to be watching him.
Okay, let's get probably his most famous out of the way first, which is the prediction of Hitler. So he refers a few times in his writings to the Hister. Specifically, there's a verse that refers to how the Hister will overflow its banks. True believers in Nostradamus will tell you that this is a reference to the Nazis surging out of Germany and invading Poland. It's not. So the word Hister is not. It is in fact a proper name, but it's not a person's name. In Old French, the French that Nostradamus wrote in, it's the name for the southern Danube.
Oui.
French. And the thing is, every year, the southern Danube, in Nostradamus' time, and I believe it's still true, flooded.
Yeah.
So all Nostradamus was predicting is that at some unspecified point in the future, a river that regularly floods is going to flood. Congratulations. He was absolutely right. It flooded. And?
It's like predicting the sun's coming up tomorrow.
Or it's going to rain eventually in New Jersey somewhere.
At some point.
It's like, I guarantee I'm right. It's going to rain in New Jersey at some point in the next century or 1,000 years.
Might
he didn't
might
give a
even
day.
happen tonight.
Yeah.
We don't know.
But what's also really interesting that is true is that there was a period during World War II where the British and the Germans conducted a form of psychological warfare on each other using astrology, where the Germans would send astrological predictions saying that they were going to win the war to the British, and the British would send altered quatrains from Nostradamus predicting the defeat of the Germans. And they did this back and forth. There's not much evidence that either side's certainly, we know Hitler was, despite the rumors to the contrary, was not a believer in astrology. There's not much evidence that Churchill or the generals on either side were. I mean, Himmler certainly believed in everything remotely paranormal.
Yeah, Himmler believed in astrology.
But Hitler absolutely did not. And as far as we could tell, it really was just psychological warfare to try to demoralize the other side.
Yeah, and the people there.
Yeah. Now, another well-known one that we've been contesting is a prediction that he makes about King Henry II of France.
Yeah.
This is the one that apparently made him famous and got him favor from Catherine de Medici. This is like the breakout role, the one thing that all of a sudden everybody said, "Oh my gosh, he's a psychic."
And I'm going to read at least one translation. There are other translations, and I'll explain why I don't agree. So the prediction says the young lion will overcome the older one on a field of combat in a single battle. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. 2 wounds made one, he dies a cruel death.
Yes.
Now, Henry II died during a joust. Jousts are sporting events, not combat. They're not battle.
I'm going to wait until you finish first.
We know that he was struck in the face with the lance. There's no mention of it piercing his eyes. And absolutely, positively, there is no way that that the helmet, let alone the visor, would have been made out of gold. Gold is a very soft metal. Armor that is worn for a joust is the heaviest, strongest, most sturdy armor they used because of the fact, again, jousting is a sporting event. The idea is not to kill your opponent.
Full contact sport.
In fact, the pictures you see, cranes lifting the knights onto horseback, that's not battle armor. That's jousting armor. Battle armor, a knight in battle and armor designed for battle often would actually run and leap onto the horse's back. They didn't need all this assistance. They didn't need all of this, cranes and things like that. That was mostly for jousting because, again, the point was to make it as protective as possible. Gold is a soft metal. It is not a good metal for armor. Again, the 2 wounds made one. There's no record of any of and aside from all of that, and here I think is the other strong argument. There's no names. I mean, young lion, older one. It doesn't give a date.
That could be almost any king.
If it hadn't happened to Henry II, they would have found somebody else to apply it to.
All right. Shall I offer my rebuttal?
Yes, by all means.
Okay. First off, there was, according to record, there were no spectators to this particular joust. This joust was personally against Henry II, who had a tendency to be an extreme hothead and the equivalent of a dude bro during the days where he honestly felt like somebody pissed me off or looked at me the wrong way, so I'm going to show him up as best as I could. It was a question of, you talked crap, so guess what? Meet me on the joust field.
No, it was not.
It was an actual event.
It was an actual event being held in honor of the wedding of, let me see. There we go. The tournament, it was a tournament held to celebrate the upcoming wedding of the king's daughter. It was a planned event. It wasn't a hot-headed, let's go fight.
That's not what was heard. This was supposedly a private one-on-one.
But that's not. That's the legend. That's not the history. The history is no. This is
All right. Spectators aside. 2, he did have a tendency to consistently think that he was invulnerable, which means that chances are he was rocking a pair of light armor because, as it was normal during the time, royals would not joust. And whenever an opponent was going up against a royal, it was customary for the opponent to raise their lance and throw the match. So chances are he threw on the lightest armor he possibly could and decided to seat upon the horse and said to himself, you ain't going to strike me, and then didn't properly defend himself. That's 2.
Except, again, your history is inaccurate.
Okay.
Henry II was an avid hunter and a participant in jousts and tournaments.
Before or after he was crowned, because he did have a brother that was sitting on that throne beforehand. That's just it.
But this was somebody who had done it before.
True. But, again, he was a bit of a hothead. Specifically, he was a bit of a hothead. He had a lot of hatred towards England. It's the reason why he was trying to marry Mary, Queen of Scots. He was also instrumental in a little bit of the assassination plot she was planning. Specifically for that. A bit of a hothead. So, you have that. Golden Cage. Let's kick into there. Golden Cage. Basically anything that a royal wore was considered to be golden. It did not matter whether or not it was steel. If they touched it, if they held it, if they possessed it, it was considered to be gold. People treated it as such. So a golden cage could just as easily have been the helmet that he wore during a joust. Which, to many people, it's like holding the frickin' game-winning football of the Super Bowl. Especially if Foles was the one that was throwing the football. Now, piercing of the eyes, yes, that did occur. He died
yes,
of
that's a matter of
wounds.
record.
2 wounds becoming 1. The wounds became gangrenous. So it went from multiple injuries to 1 single condition. 2 wounds become 1. And the young lion
In fairness,
defeats the
that's
old
also
lion.
true. He died in July 10th of septicemia.
Yes.
So I will grant you that yes, he did die of gangrene.
The old lion being the king soon to be former, and a young lion.
Who was only 6 years younger than him.
Back then, 6 years was
Not
an
that
eternity. If you live past the age of
16th
40,
century,
if you live past the age of 40, it was
that's
applaudable.
the myth. It's in the 16th century that, especially for royalty, that isn't as true as people think it was.
Except for the fact that in France, the plague was going downright ballistic, in which case then average life expectancy had plummeted.
But again, young. You're talking about a difference of 6 years. It's not that much younger.
Well, that I would grant, though. If you're comparing two royals, you're going to say one's the younger and one's the older.
The young lion defeats the older.
But yes, he was wounded in the eye by a fragment of a splintered lance. So there are parts of it I agree that fit. Parts of it that you have to shoehorn to get. I mean, I'm sorry,
bit.
you have a point. I can concede there's a bit of a point about the golden, but that's still a really. It's like,
a stretch.
Well, it definitely wasn't gold. Let's shoehorn it in.
It is stretch.
Well, the other question is how long before this happened did Nostradamus make his?
He made it beforehand. That's
He undeniably wrote this before it happened. There are examples of him predicting things after writing predictions of things that already happened. He did that. But this is not one of those cases.
There's also the thought that a good majority of the documented quatrains of his were written by his assistant after Nostradamus had died. Because when was the actual book of his published?
There's a couple of editions of it, and I think at least some of them were after he died.
Yeah, because there was like maybe about a pamphlet's worth of quatrains that he had actually legit wrote. And then the rest of the book was written by his assistant. And because his name had grown that big.
But there's also all the things he predicted he got completely wrong.
Oh, of course.
I mean, he said that the King of France would have, the four sons of the King of France would have long, successful reigns as king. 3 had short, bloody reigns. The 4th was never crowned king.
Again.
He said that in the year 1999 and 7 months, which by even the reckoning of his time period makes it July of 1999, the great King of Terror will come from the sky and resurrect the king of the Mongols. Didn't happen.
Not saying it didn't.
This is also, by the way, one of the 2 predictions.
Wait, isn't that when G.I. Joe created, or Cobra created the Emperor?
Oh, God.
So maybe,
But this is also one of the 2 predictions that got shoved together to make his prediction about 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. You
Because
gotta love this one.
the King of Terror, they changed it to, in the year of 2011, in 9 months, in the new city, which is a reference to another prediction he made.
New York.
And people interpret it as he means New York. He doesn't. Whenever he talks about the new city, and he refers to it several times in his work, he's talking about the city of Florence,
Yes.
which was a big new city in his time period. But supposedly the King of Terror would come from the sky, there would be rain of fire, and all these horrible things would happen. And no, there are other things you could make a case, like with Henry II, that he was predicting in the original prediction about the city of Florence, but it's definitely not 9/11. He did not mention the year by name.
Definitely not.
But there's a lot of other instances like that. The thing is, prophecy in general is a dicey business.
Yep.
Here's something else, not for nothing. The if you read the Old Testament, when Moses, when Elijah, when the prophets of the Old Testament are called to be prophets, the answer is no, not me. Let me explain why. In Old Testament law, if you claim to be a prophet, you claim you get information directly from God. God is perfect and infallible. If you say something is going to happen and it doesn't happen, then you're not getting your information from God, because God can't make a mistake.
And if you're getting your information from someone that is not God, you must be getting it from somebody down below. Therefore, you're a heretic.
What?
Enjoy the fire.
Actually, no. In Old Testament, the implication is that you're making it up, not that you're getting it from Satan.
Don't you get your tongue cut out for making it up back then?
No. You get killed.
Isn't that kind of the same thing back then?
Well, yeah, but it was a little bit.
You could survive
yes,
the tongue cut out.
but it was an absolute no. The punishment for false prophecy is in the Old Testament is execution.
Yeah, burn them.
In some
Wow.
interpretations, God will just strike you dead, and others you're executed. But yeah,
I've already been struck. I don't want to be struck again. I didn't make any predictions.
and to be clear, there's a difference. At least in my opinion, there's a difference between a prophet and a psychic.
Yeah.
Just like there's a difference between a psychic and someone like Arthur who does magic. My understanding, and if Arthur's listening, I would not be surprised if he calls in and says I'm wrong.
Uh-oh.
Or if another magician is listening and calls in to say I'm wrong. My understanding is psychic ability is something internal. It's using your own ability, your own energy, your own power.
Yes, it is.
Magic is using... It's partly using... It is not just external, as I'm about to say. You also use your own ability, but you're also calling on external energy, external forces, potentially spirits, but not always. Case in point, Arthur does not rely on spirits. But you are drawing on external forces instead of doing it internally.
Agree.
And to make a third distinction, because Arthur and I have had this debate before, the difference between magic and prayer, in my personal opinion, is magic commands, prayer beseeches. In magic, you do it yourself. In prayer, you ask God to do it. No, and I'll be very clear. I am not making a moral judgment here. I'm not saying magic is inherently evil. I'm not saying magic is inherently good. I'm just saying the nature of what you're doing is a more controlling sense than in prayer where you're asking someone to do it. But particularly since in magic, the idea is you're trying to control impersonal forces of nature, not force your will on another intelligent being. That's not inherently, harnessing gravity to do something in scientific terms is not evil. It's just
Damn difficult.
okay. Magnetism. Using magnetism. It's like using magnetism. You're not asking the spirit of magnetism to draw metal objects to you. It's just you're using a fundamental force of nature.
Yes.
To do what you want, but you're asserting your will over it. Again, nothing inherently evil about doing that.
Okay. Let's talk about another psychic.
Yeah.
Edgar Cayce.
Right.
The great sleeping prophet.
Yes.
Cayce is also a really interesting case.
Yes.
And it also very much someone who, in my opinion, gets more credit than he deserves.
Although, to his credit, from what I understand, he didn't seek out a lot of attention like a lot of
True.
prophets do. So I think it was a case of
I'm not
somebody who
necess-
genuinely felt that he
Yeah.
had this.
Word was he did not charge.
No.
To the best of my knowledge, and I'm by no means an expert on Cayce, but to the best of my knowledge, you're absolutely correct.
In which case, then, why make it up? I don't think he made it up. I think he legitimately believed.
I think he legitimately believed, but I also think he made it up. And I'll get into that because I broadly define three types of psychic. I personally believe Nostradamus was an outright fraud. I don't think he had any. I think he knew he was full of it. I think he was in it for the money and the glory, and he got plenty.
Oh, yeah.
Cayce, I think, honestly, legitimately believed in what he was doing. That doesn't mean I'm convinced he actually had a gift. Because there are lots of people in the world that honestly legitimately believe they're psychic, that many of them even have a degree of psychic ability, but they've convinced themselves they have more of a gift than they actually do.
Is it true he helped out on the Lindbergh case, or at least was consulted?
He was consulted. He didn't produce results.
Okay.
Well, here's the thing he's probably most famous for. So he made a bunch of predictions, including predicting and wrongly that they would find Atlantis by now. And lo and behold, we have not.
As far as we know.
Yeah, but unless you could say, yeah, here we did. And I'll come back to this in a second because there is something we found that people have connected to it, but there's a reason why that doesn't work. But the other side of this is that he's very famous for going into trances and predicting cures for people who were sick. And supposedly, he had a high degree of success of predicting various cures. There's a couple of problems with this. First, in actual statistical analysis, the main thing he prescribed, regardless of condition, was beef stew.
Okay.
Nothing against beef stew, but it doesn't have any particular healing qualities.
Depends on what it is you got.
Not special, just beef, basically beef stew.
Sure.
2, what he would do is he would receive, because this is way back in the day, he'd get letters about people's problems and then do a reading on them.
Right.
There's several documented instances where between the time the letter was sent and the time that he did the reading, the person died. Now, it isn't what parapsychologists would call post-cognition, where you were seeing into the past. It was supposed to be he was doing a psychic long-distance reading of that person's medical state at the time of the prediction. Don't you think he would have noticed they were dead?
Mail was slow back then.
Yes. But he got the letter, and taking him at his word that he's doing what he says he does, that he is astrally projecting or remote viewing or whatever he's doing to see that person who he was written about, and psychically understand their condition at the time he's doing the reading, not at the time that the letter was sent.
Right.
He should have noticed they were dead. That's a pretty glaring misdiagnosis. There's a funny excuse I've seen at least a few of his believers give, which was, well, did they try the cure anyway? It's like, no, they were dead.
That's kind of funny.
Did they try turning them off and on again?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's like,
But you power your brain on and off.
a joke about somebody who dies of like the flu or something. Oh, did you try feeding them chicken soup? But they're dead. Well, it can't hurt.
Or beef stew in this case. All right,
I don't think that Cayce was deliberately deceiving people. I think he may have had a degree of ability, and his own mind, he hyped it up beyond what it was.
He was kind of a quiet man, really. If he hyped it up, it would have been because he had ulterior motive.
Not necessarily. Again, I'm not saying he hyped it up to people in general, that he hyped it up his own mind. And you don't need ulterior motives to work your... I mean, again, a lot of people who do legitimately have a degree of ability think they have more than they do. And they're not seeking fame, it's just... Because here's the thing. You get, we have a tendency, psychologically speaking, to... It's called... Oh, what's the name for the dang thing?
What?
I'm trying to...
Give me a simile.
So, when you're sitting at home and you're thinking of your best friend who you haven't talked to in like 3 months, and the phone rings and it's them? To give an example. You remember that.
Situational coincidence.
That's what's going on. That's not... confirmation bias. That's where.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's why I was wondering if you were...
What it is, people remember the successes, they forget the failures. And this isn't a criticism of psychics in general, or psychics specifically. It's a criticism of the human species and the way our brains are wired. I'm not saying that these people are deliberately trying to deceive others. It's a form of self-deception. Because now think about it. Just about everyone listening to me right now has probably at least once in their life had the phone ring and knew just who it was calling. Had a dream that seemed to come true the next day. All sorts of other things that if you look at it statistically and compare it to, okay, how many thousands of dreams the average adults had in their lifetime, whether you remember them consciously or not. That details of one of them did come true is not that unlikely.
Yeah, it's a bit of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
But if you have enough coincidences like this stack up, sometimes people convince themselves, I've really got something. And they may have something. And, again, I'm certainly not saying that psychic ability doesn't exist. There's the third well-known example that we were talking about, Lorraine Warren, who I would say is legitimately psychic. But there's a reason I would say that she's legitimately psychic as opposed to a lot of the other people to make the claim, which is Lorraine was actually tested at UCLA. and passed with. I mean, she passed with distinction. A lot of other famous psychics today, Sylvia Brown's never subjected herself to any sort of objective testing. John Edwards, James von Prague, none of them have gone through tests through parapsychologists. Now,
they did go through tests. They just failed miserably.
Most of the time, they didn't even go through tests.
I know that a number of the cold readers did.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the most famous one who went through tests and passed, who we now know by his own admission was a fraud, which would be Uri Geller, the spoon
Yeah.
Because I still run into people who think he's real. Uri Geller is, at this point, an admitted magician.
Yeah.
It's taken him decades, but he has admitted that what he's doing is a magic trick. What you run into is there's been a whole there's a whole thing like Project Alpha, which was run by James Randi, who's the probably the world's most famous skeptic today.
He's the man.
But he was the man. He became way too old and jaded.
Of course.
And I'm going to come back to Randy in a second, but Project Alpha, he sent a pair of amateur magicians into a parapsychology lab to deliberately fake out the parapsychologists. And it worked. The reality is parapsychology throughout its history has had trouble with proper controls on experiments. The thing that the skeptics won't tell you is they actually have listened to the advice they've gotten over the decades, and they're making their tests stricter. Modern tests that are coming out in parapsychology are much more tightly controlled. They actually do have journals where they're publishing findings. They do have meetings. They do act like a science. And the studies that have been done most recently in support of parapsychology, there are studies that support psychic phenomenon. What they find is single studies don't show much of a result. Metadata studies across a range of studies show that something is going on here that is above the range that you would expect given chance. It's not like, we're not talking, oh my God, we've got somebody who can, go through a 52 card playing deck properly shuffled and tell you every card. But people are doing well enough that statistically something worth studying is here. To which, in defense of first, before I get into a defense of psychic ability, I want to give out the number because we've reached the half an hour mark.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to call in and join us, if there are any psychics who want to weigh in on this, and I am about to I've been hard on psychics, now it's time to be nicer on them. So don't think this is all about dumping on you guys. 609-807-2492, 609-807-2492. So there are, in fact, two stories that don't get told very often of psychics who got it darn right. One of which is the story of the mass spectrograph.
Okay.
So the man who developed the mass spectrograph also discovered an ion of neon.
Oh, yeah.
But what's interesting is how he found it. According to him, and this is based on his Nobel Prize speech, he read a book called Occult Chemistry. Occult Chemistry was written by a very famous woman by the name of Annie Besant. So there's this group called Theosophy. It was basically the New Age movement before there was a New Age movement. It took Western magical tradition and Western religion and added in Eastern philosophy and Eastern mysticism. They even had a guy for a while that they claimed was the third incarnation of Jesus Christ,
Right.
with Buddha being one of the other incarnations. Of course, Jesus himself being the third. But they wrote this book called Occult Chemistry, where they claimed to use clairvoyance, the ability to see things through psychic means, to go down to the atomic level and observe matter, and find what they called paraneon. They gave, in the book Occult Chemistry, they gave the atomic weight of paraneon. It's not exactly, but it's within like a point or two of the actual weight of this ion that the man found. and it was close enough and the information was useful enough, he explicitly thanked them for their help in his discoveries in his Nobel acceptance speech. The other
Pretty awesome.
example is the electroencephalogram, the machine we use to read people's brainwaves patterns. The man who developed that had a rather interesting experience, which decidedly might fall into the confirmation bias, but it was interesting enough that he did some research. He fell off of a horse and broke his arm. At the same time, his sister had a flash of insight that something terrible had happened to her brother. He was curious about that flash of insight, and that's what led to him developing the EEG, was trying to understand that experience of his sister. So I think, and I've said this in a few of the various talks I've had with atheists, and to defense and to the credit of the atheists I've spoken to, they agree. Whether you believe that psychic ability objectively exists or not, and at this point, we can't demonstrate it to the absolute high degrees of peer review. But whether you agree that it exists or not, there is clearly a scientific value in asking the questions properly.
Sure.
Because, again, we have a mass spectrograph because somebody went, what are they talking about? Is there some truth to this paraneon? We have the EEG because somebody went, why did my sister have this experience of thinking something terrible happened to me with no external stimulus?
Coincidence or psychic bond?
And here's one of the most common arguments you will hear from skeptics, aside from the lack of evidence, is that for psychic abilities to be true, we'd have to throw out everything we know about physics. That's fundamentally wrong. Because there's a whole field of physics that when you get in, the more you get into it, the more it sounds like mystics.
Oh, yeah.
Mysticism, which is, of course, quantum. According to quantum theory, what affects one molecule in one part of the universe can affect another one light years away on an atom. And bizarre. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Weird things happen. And the argument you will get, which is also fundamentally untrue, and I can demonstrate why, is that, well, what happens at the subatomic level is absolutely bizarre. That's the subatomic level. Supposedly it doesn't affect the macro universe. I'll demonstrate why that's wrong. Real simple. Photons, the basic thing that light is made up of, are a subatomic wave or particle depending on the situation. Yes?
Yeah.
The human retina is not subatomic. Do you know how many photons it takes for the human retina to respond?
1.
Yes. 1. One subatomic particle can produce a result in the human retina, which is a macro. It's not subatomic. So what affects one can affect the other. Do we entirely understand how the two interact? No. We're getting much better at our understanding of quantum mechanics, but we still have a ways to go. And the reality of the situation is this: just because we don't understand how it works doesn't mean that it doesn't.
Right. We still don't understand entirely how the brain works.
And we're still learning
everything.
about hypnosis left and right. And let's face it, about a good 200 years ago, we thought that it was complete and total hogwash. As it turns out, now it's actually a science. Amazing.
But there are things that a few hundred years ago we thought were bad. The modern, and for that matter, and it's a broader truth, that the foundations of many modern sciences are in magic.
Yes.
Modern astronomy comes from higher astrology, which not just predicting the future by the planets, but actually tracking the movement of planets. And the ancient astrologers did figure out decades in advance when comets were coming through, when planets would conjoin. Chemistry is, of course, very famous for the fact that it's derived from alchemy.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely true. Toxicology, the study of poison and how it affects the body, also comes from alchemy. All of modern medicine in the Western world largely comes out of alchemy as well. The first doctor to come forward and say that the four humors, the blood and the sanguine, the phlegm, and so forth, was wrong.
Galen's model.
But yeah, that was wrong. And to start basically to propose the beginnings of germ theory was Paracelsus, who was very much was an alchemist. He was not a modern physician by modern standards, but he was very, despite the fact he had these beliefs of alchemy, and we can get into that in a minute, but he very specifically was trying various plants and various herbs and carefully, methodically noting how it affected the patient, and starting to turn back the superstition about bloodletting and things like that hundreds of years ago. And he was still considered an alchemist, and he still had the gold. Isaac Newton was an alchemist. As much time as he spent figuring out physics, he spent more time trying to develop the Philosopher's Stone. So, for anyone who doesn't know, and I think that's probably almost nobody, because alchemy is pretty famous. Alchemy is an inherently magical practice concerned with purification. People tend to think of it most famously as lead into gold. There are three major goals of alchemy. The least of the three is changing base metals into more valuable metals, including, yes, lead into gold. There's a theory in alchemy that all metals are basically the same material. Everything is gold is a question of how pure the metal is. By removing impurities from the metal, you can increase the value. And, of course, there's a degree of truth here because...
Well, when it comes to things like carbon and steel, yes.
Yes. Because of carbon and, the carbon content in steel, the more carbon you get out of it, the better. But this idea that you have lead, by the right experiments, you remove impurities, eventually you will get gold, or at least silver. The second goal, which is what inspired Mary Goodwin, a.k.a. Mary, who would later be known as Mary Shelley, was the creation of life. Specifically what they would call homunculus. Homunculus is a short, yay tall human being created with human blood and semen. And specifically, corrected, human menstrual blood and semen.
Nice.
That supposedly alchemists created. And then the third goal, and the true ultimate goal of all alchemists, and the great purpose to which the Philosopher's Stone, that was the holy grail of alchemy, was immortality. Because disease and aging are impurities of the flesh. By removing impurities, you can eventually live forever.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in Taoism as well.
And Taoism has its own form of alchemy.
Yeah.
Yes. That's why it is inherently a magical practice. It's not really a scientific one, because ironically, it's a magical practice that operated scientifically, because they were conducting experiments and throwing out data and making discoveries, all with an inherently magical goal. Right. This, of course, would tie into the other person we were talking about before the show, John Dee.
Oh, yeah.
Alchemist, magician, astrologer, spy.
All around interesting dude.
Oh, yeah.
He did have a very extensive library. I will grant him that.
Just about all, if not, or almost all of which is in the British Museum now, so it's still available. He is a really neat figure and probably worth a showing of himself. He also came up with, and this gets referred to occasionally in pop culture, though a lot of people don't know much about it, Enochian, which is supposed to be the written language of the angels.
Mm-hmm. Enochian is, yeah.
Of course, here's the kicker. This is a side tangent that amuses me because it does relate here. If you go back to the old Hebrew sources, does anyone know what the language of the angels in heaven is? Yes?
Math?
No. Yes?
It's ancient Hebrew.
Yes! The language of God, according to the ancient Israelites, is Hebrew.
Well, of course. They would believe that.
They're the ones that wrote the book that said that the ancient language is the angels, is Hebrew. Just like if I was the first one to write the book, I'd say the original language of the angels was Brooklyn. Come on.
Brooklynese.
Yeah. Get out of my clouds over here.
I'm flying here.
No, I'm just thinking of an angel doing Harley Quinn.
Oh, God. I can imagine Joe Pesci being Michael. There it is.
No, come on. That's Robert De Niro.
No, De Niro would be Uriel or somebody like that. But you got Pesci basically doing a classic like beatdown with the trident upon the Satan, left and right, like he was a Goodfellas, just like.
No. You make a good case, but we all know that Michael is John Travolta.
And Christopher Walken is Gabriel.
I really like that movie.
It was a good movie. I just hate that you hit me with that, and I didn't think of it first. But the best Lucifer, what's all?
Is still Viggo Mortensen.
No, it's still Al Pacino.
I think Viggo Mortensen was better, but Pacino had more time.
Pacino had more chops.
He had more time in the role. He spent the whole movie where Viggo was in for the last, 10 minutes?
Yeah, and you know what? No. Viggo is...
For the second one, thank you.
What?
And the first 5 for the second one.
Except it was a different actor.
Yeah, they got a different actor to play him.
Pacino is still the devil.
De Niro was also a really good devil.
Pacino was really. If you were doing the full, like Martin Scorsese does a sequel to Last Temptation of Christ, where he just does the story of the angels.
Oh gosh.
Then yes, you're gonna have your Christopher Walken. You're gonna have
Joe Pesci.
You're gonna have De Niro. You're gonna have James Woods.
Ray Liotta's gonna be Raphael.
Ray
So
Liotta.
something to keep in mind, folks, because we are coming
Pacino.
up near the end of the show. So again, the point we're making here is yes, we believe there are legitimate psychics in the world. The ones I've met, because I have met a few over the years, usually aren't big on publicity. They don't like their philosophy about charging people for their services tends to be a lot like mine, in the little to nothing. And I'm not necessarily saying every psychic who wants at least some money is full of it. But particularly ones that go into houses to help usually go in with groups, and they're not going to take money except for expenses. And again, my advice is to be leery of ones that do. And if they do look at how much they charge. Sylvia Brown charged over $1,000 to talk to her on the phone.
Yeah.
And had a 0% success rate at everything, pretty much.
Except scoring cons.
Yeah. But there are psychics, there are people out there that may or not have a legitimate ability that are at least genuinely trying to help people and not trying to make a fast buck. And we don't denounce those people. Adam Ruins Everything, I thought, made a good case on the subject that for some people, going to a psychic can actually be a less expensive form of therapy.
It can be.
Yeah, that's what some people need.
Yeah.
So we're not here to say it's all fake. We're just here to say be cautious, use your own judgment, think things through. The other big thing we need to do, because this is very good news, is that if anyone has forgotten, that next week, this will be October 10th, is going to make our 50th episode here
Dun, dun.
on Hamilton Radio. We've got a bunch of cool stuff planned. We're looking, and I'm going to plug it now again because this is particularly a time to, if you can help us out with the GoFundMe, we are looking to do a full 2-hour show. The Age Out Angels, the great show that's on after us, usually won't be here that week. I'm going to bring in magic. Baron, if we have the time, is going to do some hypnotism.
Of course.
We've got past guests calling in.
I can do some readings and stuff.
Brian will read some stuff from his book. It's going to be really cool. Again, okay, folks, brass tacks. We have a month to raise the money to go to a 2-hour show.
Yes.
Our station manager is wonderful and extremely helpful and is cutting us the slack to have from now to November 4th that we can go to a second show, but we do need the support. You can do that by using our affiliate links for both Audible Trial and for Nord, which we're going to get to in a second.
Yes.
You could do that by liking, commenting, subscribing. Another thing I want to push that doesn't cost you a penny, and if you're a content creator like we are, this will help you out, is there's a great website called Breach, BREACH, that's BREACH.TV, TV like television.
Mm-hmm.
It is a website along the lines of YouTube for sharing videos. They're a really nice website. They're kind of small at the moment, which is one of the reasons I'm promoting it here.
I'm going to be putting up videos on there soon.
Brian, I think, is going to put some up as well.
once I can get the videos done.
It is just like YouTube. It is free to join. It is free to upload videos. They do not do the monetization nonsense that YouTube does. You put up your videos, you'll be able to get monetized. Especially because it's a small site at the moment, and one of the reasons I'm bringing it up is I want to change that for them because they're so great. If if there's a copyright strike, you're actually going to be dealing with you're going to be able to talk to somebody to appeal it more easily. You're not dealing with all the various your content's too controversial. YouTube, you put a video up on the Holocaust, even if you're just saying the Holocaust actually happened and it was horrible, okay, they'll still demonetize you. Breach isn't I have videos up on the Holocaust on Breach. They haven't hit me. And they also, the payout in terms of the percentage you get from your advertisers is better on Breach than it is on YouTube. I would definitely recommend checking it out. All of the videos we've done are available up there. And then again, as much as I hate to do this, if you do have a couple of extra bucks, you can go to GoFundMe.com slash paranormal-encyclopedia, GoFundMe.com slash paranormal-encyclopedia. All of the links for this stuff is in the description below. Help us out. Help us try to get to the amount where we can go to a two-hour show format. There's so much more we can do with the time,
and we will.
Yeah,
guaranteed.
Yeah, and I'll say this as well because I hate begging like this. If we don't hit that, here's the situation. If we don't hit our goal and we don't get to 2 hours, then we're still going to be here for an hour. This isn't like the whole show's future does not depend on getting the money.
Right.
So help us out, and you want to know what? You'll get more of us.
Yeah.
You'll get more of Brian. You'll get more of Kevin. You'll get more of me.
And I do want to actually give a specific shout out to John French, one of our frequent guests, and a very nice guy who's already been who is our first supporter.
Yeah.
But that's going to do it for tonight. So we're going to have Baron read off our other ad.
In my very wonderful voice. Everyone is concerned about internet security these days, from governments to major corporations. Even the average internet user should be concerned about who is seeing your online information and how that information can be used. NordVPN is the answer you've been looking for. A VPN is a virtual private network that protects your IP address so that your online activity is protected by a military-grade encryption. The way it works is you connect to Nord's protected network, and then they connect to the internet. It's a layer of protection between you and all the viruses, malware, and snoopers out there. Nord works on all devices too, not just computers. Your phone, tablet, whatever, up to 6 devices at a time, regardless of what operating system they use, Nord works with them all. Access all the internet content you want, streaming media, websites, and social platforms. Nothing is restricted on Nord. So it's a great way to get around those pesky firewalls at work, or maybe if you live in a country that's not so internet friendly. They have easy plans starting at a month for $11.95 down to 3-year plans for as low as $2.75 a month. Check out risk-free at nordvpn.com and you'll be glad you did.
Okay, and there's actually one other thing I should promote since it now looks like it's official. I will be there. Is this weekend, or not this weekend, next weekend, among others, in fact, because they're doing it 3 weekends this year, there's going to be the Halloween in the Catskills event up at Blackthorn Resort in the Catskills. I am going to be speaking there. I'm doing 3 presentations each of the 3 weekends. It's going to be campfire ghost stories. It's going to be a bit of I'm going to do some magic, and I'm going to bring back by popular demand, because I've done it every year and it's been wildly popular, 100 candles, where we light 100 candles and we tell ghost stories. You finish this ghost story, you put out a candle. When you put out the last candle, supposedly a ghost will appear. I will be honest, no ghost has appeared so far in the 3 times now that we've done this. But if nothing happens, you're still sitting around in the dark by candlelight telling ghost stories. It's a lot of fun.
Indeed.
But that is going to do it for tonight. I am your host, Kevin Mears.
And I am Baron Voltage.
I'm Brian McKinley.
Saying good night and God bless.
Avoid lightning rods.
Say it. Say it.
Say it. Bah. We got 5 more minutes. Say it.
What?
Blargle.
Blargle. My goodness. He has blargled beyond all. I'm going to say this also. A very special thanks to Rosenbach for having
Yes.
It was without a doubt the most fun I've had on a Tuesday, to say the least.
And a thank you to JD and Dacre.
Oh, beyond a doubt. I'm telling you, buy their book. And you want to know what? Check out JD's backlog. His books, yeah. Okay, enough said.
And keep an eye out. Among the people we've talked to, we're going to be having I want to have both JD and Dacre on. I want to have them together to talk about their book, and then I want to grab JD to talk about his books because he's done some stuff about serial killers. His first book, Stephen King was nice enough to let him use characters from one of my favorite Stephen King novels,
Needful things. Yes.
So I definitely want to pick his brain about those. He's a super nice guy. He was receptive to coming on.
His daughter was so cute. She was wearing a little pink shirt that said "The snuggle is real." It was such a stark contrast to somebody that writes about the worst, horrible, imaginable things there, and then you got this little cute thing. It just got this. It just completely melted my black heart.
And remember to listen next week when we will be doing the 50th episode, which is very much intended as a lot of fun, kicking back. We're going to do a bunch, and it's the other support us thing you can do, subscribe.
Yes. Like and subscribe.
Because when we're at 430 subs right now. When we hit 500, we're going to do a thank you episode for our viewers.
Without a doubt. And you know what? Share. If you're on our Facebook page right now watching us, share the video. I guarantee you will not regret it.
Instagram.
We have Instagram. We got Twitter.
We
has the Twitter.
Instagram, Twitter. We have a website. We're going to be, in the next week or so, we're going to be updating that.
Yes.
Because it's ridiculously past due.
Yeah, you're gonna be seeing lovely pictures of me on there now.
And Brian.
And Brian.
And the three of us
Brian,
together.
it's gonna be awesome. You got a lot more that you could write in your bio than I ever could.
You're a bloody the head of the League of Ethical Evil Hypnotists.
Yes.
Seriously, you were struck by lightning. That's
Yeah.
pretty good
You want to know
bio
what the thing
material.
is that I have to hypnotize people into thinking that I'm famous.
You're still cool.
All right.
All right. We're going to call it a night.
That's going to wrap it for tonight, folks. Again, thank you so much for listening, and have a good night.
Hasta lasagna. Don't get any on you.
Still, see, that's a good one.
Are we clear?